Now I'm going to cover which lens ports to buy for your water housing so that you can make the most of the different lenses you're going to use with your camera. Essentially, there are 2 or 3 different types of ports. I'd say there's just standard flat port. I'll show you an example of that. This is a liquid eye flat port for the C6000. So this end screws onto the water housing. You shoot through a flat piece of acrylic in this case. Here's another one for the Sea Frogs system. This one's got a bayonet mount, but it works in exactly the same way. You shoot through the flat acrylic. And here's an Aquatech one. This one's made of aluminium, but it has a very similar system with a screw to the liquid eye. So whether it's plastic or aluminium and you're shooting through, usually you're going to be shooting through acrylic, which is got good optical properties. It's clear. If it does scratch, it's easy to polish that scratch out, or in fact it's quite cheap to just replace the whole front element. That's another thing that most of these ports will allow you to do is liquid eye have a little grub screw in the side. So you unscrew that, you can screw off this outer part and then drop in a new clear acrylic element, and there's an O-ring in there which keeps it sealed. So you can normally replace these. Sometimes you won't be able to do it yourself, sometimes you'll have to send them off, but if you do get a scratch, it's not normally a problem. So there's the flat port. There's also a zoom port, which depending on the type of housing you've got, some housings, this is a liquid eye, have zoom controls on the side. So I can use that flat port with this zoom control and the Sony 16 to 50mm lens in this case to zoom from 16 to 50mm when I'm inside the housing. Other systems like the Sea Frogs have the same sort of thing, but you do require extra bits like this. This is a gear ring which slips over your lens, and then that mates inside with a little cog, and then you change the zoom control there. But there's some ports and some housing systems which use it's a zoom control, but it's built into the port itself. And I'll show you an example. There's an Aquatech one from one of their older systems where you can control the zoom. It uses the same sort of gear rings, very similar to that, but you control the zoom from the port itself. So that's number 2, zoom ports. Then you've got number 3, which is dome ports, which are a little bit different. They are, as you'd imagine, domed. They also use acrylic most of the time. You can get glass domes, but they tend to be for dive housings, and they're very, very expensive, and you wouldn't want to be waving them around in front of surfers, I don't think, because there's much more chance of it smashing into a million pieces. This is an example of an Aquatech dome, a big one. Let's show you this liquid eye dome, which is on the other end of the scale in terms of size, but as you can see, very similar in terms of what it's actually made up of. It's just a different scale. So I think this is an 8-inch dome and this is a 4-inch dome. That's normally refers to the diameter of the dome. So if you see 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, those are the common diameters that you'll see for dome ports. Occasionally there'll be really, really big domes. I'll put a couple of example pictures up. And the reason you want to use a really big dome is for over-under shots. That's pretty much the only reason. But smaller domes generally will do the same sort of job. All it does is it allows you to shoot with a wide angle lens like this 7.5mm fisheye. So this has an angle of view, I think, of about 180 degrees. If you can imagine that, diagonally it sees 180 degrees. Everything in front of you essentially is caught by this lens. So if you try to shoot that through a flat port, then you're going to get vignetting, which is dark corners, because it's just not going to be able to see everything. So the reason you choose a dome port is to shoot a lens like this, which otherwise wouldn't be able to see everything that the lens can see. You get dark corners where the corners of the lens port show up in your picture. So dome ports for really, really wide angle lenses, especially fisheyes, and flat ports for pretty much anything beyond. I mean, this one, for instance, is compatible with a 10 to 18mm. That's on an APS-C sensor, so watch my video about equivalence to find out. Essentially, that makes it a 15mm rectilinear lens. Again, I'll explain that in the lens details. Basically, it's not got the distortion of a fisheye, it's not as wide as a fisheye, but you can go from about 15mm up, you can shoot through a flat port. 15mm is quite wide, and you can get 15mm or 16mm fisheyes, which you wouldn't be able to shoot through a flat port. But if you've got a rectilinear lens, non-distorted lens, effectively that means, then anything from, let's say, 20mm up, you want to be shooting through a flat port. The only time you'd want to shoot through one of those lenses through a dome port is if you really want to do an over-under. In that case, I'd recommend getting a fisheye instead, because fisheyes give you that cool distortion and they're much wider, so they'll be much easier to shoot. I've got a whole video on that coming up later. So there's your three main types: your flat port, your zoom port, and your dome port. And essentially you just pick one that fits your lens inside and that allows you to shoot without cropping any of the corners. The distance between the front of your lens and the lens port it's not super important. You don't want it to be massive. You don't want to shoot through a really, really long port with a really short lens, but mostly because you're going to get the sides of the lens port in the shot. So I haven't had any bad experiences shooting with slightly longer lens ports and slightly shorter lenses, but you might start getting reflections. You might start, if the close focus distance of your lens is not beyond the lens port, then you can focus on the lens port itself. And I've had that problem when I've been shooting with macro lenses. Macro lenses are designed specifically to focus very, very close. And I've shot, say, for instance, the Sony 30mm f3.5 macro lens in this port, which works fine with the Sony 10-18mm or the Sony 35mm f1.8. But with the 30mm, there's examples that I've shot where it's focused on the actual front of the lens port rather than beyond it. So you might run into problems like that if you have a particularly long port and a shorter lens. But generally speaking, if you can shoot through it without seeing any dark corners, then you should be fine, good to go. Dome ports, as I say, they normally come in different sizes. If you're shooting above water, then you want the smallest one possible that's going to work with your lens. That's a good rule of thumb. So this one's designed for like the Samyang 8mm fisheye or the Sony 16mm with the fisheye adapter. Small compact fisheyes for small compact cameras. And then this one, this one is for an old full frame film camera, and it was for a 15mm fisheye. So as you can see, again, quite small, designed for above the water work. If you want to shoot below water, there's a strange property of dome ports, which means that you're not actually focusing the distance away that you are from an object underwater. You're actually focusing on a virtual image of that object, which is quite a lot closer. Essentially, the water around the outside of the dome creates another lens that you're shooting through, and that lens effectively means your focus distance is much shorter. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's what you need to know. So what it means is if you want to shoot underwater, you've got to pull your focus all the way back in. So for instance, this Maker 6.5mm circular fisheye, I have to set this one, if I'm shooting above water, I set the manual focus to about 1 meter, and I set my aperture to f8 if it's nice and sunny, and that will get pretty much everything above water from about 1 meter out in focus. And you really want it to be that close, because you don't set it to infinity, because with a fisheye you need to be so close to things to make them seem big in the frame, and that's part of the aim. Is the thing that you want people to concentrate on needs to be big in the frame, generally speaking, unless you're going for a particular type of composition. But a good rule of thumb is make the subject of the image fill the frame. So in order to do that, you need to be very, very close to something with a fisheye lens. So I'd set that to about 1 meter, f8 for above water. If I was going to shoot underwater, and I have done, and I do like the results from this lens underwater, I'd set this to, again, about f8 as long as there's enough light, maybe f4 if it's pretty murky water. I probably wouldn't be shooting underwater if it's that murky. But then you want to set the focus to, in this case, I think it's 0.1. I can set the focus inside of 0.1 meter, so 10 centimeters. What's that, about that? What's 3 inches or so, 3.5 inches. So that's, I set it to that and shoot through this dome port, for instance, and I get in focus shots underwater with that really close focus distance. I have to spin it all the way up to a meter, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's the other end of the scale on this focus scale for a fisheye to shoot over water. And there's lots more to consider if you want to shoot over and under. First things first, you need as big a dome as you can manage. So that's why you see these ridiculously oversized domes occasionally, but the results they get, you get a really crisp line of water across the shot, which you won't get if the water's closer to the lens. These type of ports, I've had really good luck with shooting over-unders. That's what they're designed for. They're a bit bulky for just shooting shore breaks and barrels, which is often where you want to shoot with a fisheye. That's the type of lens that necessitates a dome port. So generally speaking, above water, grab yourself the smallest dome that will fit your lens inside. Over under, get the biggest dome you can get, basically, or make sure that it's compatible with the lens you want to use. I would suggest the widest lens possible, and then get a port that works with that, that's as big as possible. And if you're shooting underwater, big ports are good, but you don't necessarily need them as big as this. You could probably, like I say, I can shoot with a 4-inch port underwater okay. You just have to make sure you've set your focus up properly. So again, underwater I'd go for maybe a happy medium. A 6-inch port's quite a popular one. I know Acrotech do want a 6-inch. I think most housings will offer a 6-inch for that middle ground, underwater mostly, a 4-inch for overwater, and a bigger 8-inch plus for over under. So those are the different reasons for choosing different types of dome port. I'm going to go into the techniques of keeping them free from water drops in the next video, but that should get you sorted, and it should keep you get you the right port for your lenses. And if you do wonder, like, I don't know if I'm going to need, maybe I haven't got a lens at the moment that's going to use a dome port, but I might need one in the future, go back through your Instagram bookmarks, see if you can see any that are over under, check your fisheye shots and see if they feature over and underwater at the same time. If they do, they'll be shooting with a big port. If it's just above water, then you just need a small port. So one other thing, I've explained why you don't want to shoot with a fisheye or a wide angle and a flat port, but what about the other way around? Would you shoot with a 50mm lens through a dome port, for instance? And obviously it would fit. Not obviously, but if it does fit, would you do it? Well, you can, and some people get good results doing that. Personally, I've had issues with autofocus lenses through a dome port. Not so much the wide angle, because wide angles tend to be a bit better at focusing because there's a bit more depth of field. But longer lenses, let's say 35mm plus, I do tend to it struggles to focus for me because of the different techniques you use. Long story short, you shoot through a flat port with the port being completely dry, ideally, and you shoot through a dome port with the port being completely wet. And I think it's because of the properties of the port, because it's domed and it's got water on it. The autofocus struggles for me. I've got quite a few shots that I've shot with a 50mm through a dome port that nothing in the shot is in focus. So I would avoid it if you possibly can. Get yourself a flat port. Flat ports are easier to manage when you're in the water, I find. So it's a bit less hassle in general. So if you're just going to be shooting with a 50mm or 35 or whatever it happens to be, anything that isn't a fisheye or really wide angle, just get a flat port, and I think you'll save yourself some hassle. So yeah, the dome port I wouldn't go for if it's going to be your only port and you're going to be shooting with those longer lenses. That's it for ports for now. I'm going to talk to you in a moment about how to keep them free from water drops that can ruin your shot.